And just last week, a massive reversal from the Justice Department, which has been the lead enforcer of Olmstead, repudiating its long-held view of the Olmstead decision, and for the first time, interpreting the decision in a way that flies in the face of 5 decades of law, the Supreme Court's decision itself, and the will of Congress. The right to community integration, which is what Olmstead is about, is the most fundamental and treasured of rights for people with disabilities. Being forced to live in an institution impacts every aspect of people's lives, including who they spend time with, what they eat, when they eat, who they live with, and how they spend their day, and it generally makes things like work and education impossible. Today's briefing focuses on housing policy because recent shifts in that policy are one of the biggest challenges that we currently face in implementing Olmstead. And housing policy is also at the core of the federal government's sudden reversal on Olmstead. The DOJ suggests incorrectly and without evidence that somehow Olmstead is responsible for increasing homelessness. The truth is quite the opposite. Olmstead is all about ensuring that people with disabilities have the community services they need, and it has been one of the most important tools in expanding housing for people with disabilities. We're going to hear from a terrific panel today, moderated by my colleague, Claire Shannon, that will cover the importance of housing to making community integration work, and how shifts in federal housing policy are expected to increase homelessness and institutionalization of people with disabilities. The panelists will address this from the lens of a service provider, a person who has lived and succeeded in supportive housing, a housing and homelessness advocate, and someone who works with state and local service systems to develop housing and services for people with disabilities. We will have Q&A and then closing remarks by my colleague Ann Raish. But before we start the panel, we're going to hear from Stephanie DeLuca, who is a policy advisor for Senator Tammy Duckworth. Senator Duckworth couldn't be here today, but she has been a great champion for disability rights, for housing, and for community mental health services, particularly for our veterans. We owe Senator Duckworth for helping to save the Americans with Disabilities Act and for consistently advancing policies to promote community living. Stephanie is here on behalf of Senator Duckworth. Stephanie has been a longtime friend to and member of the disability community and has worked in the Senate for many years with Senator Casey and then Senator Duckworth, and is a great champion herself of community housing and services for people with disabilities. Thank you.
Wow, that was such a fancy introduction. Thank you. So sorry the senator couldn't be here. She's definitely sends her regards and thanks you for everything that you do. Unfortunately, her schedule was too tight today. So you're stuck with me. And Jennifer pretty much said everything already, but I will put a little bit of Duckworth flavor on it. So some of you may already have known this, but as she said last Thursday, the DOJ incorrectly put out an opinion that the U.S. Supreme Court Olmstead decision of 1999 was incorrect. Olmstead affirmed that people with disabilities have a right to live, work, and go to school and receive services in the most integrated setting possible. The Supreme Court said that the warehousing of unjustified institutionalization of people with disabilities is a violation of Title II of the ADA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Today, Senator Duckworth is introducing a resolution that affirms Olmstead and calls on the Department of Justice to immediately rescind this dangerous memo. So if you have questions on that, please reach out to me. All that is to say, today's briefing is very timely. Last week's DOJ memo was just the latest in a series of attacks on unhoused people and people with disabilities. Almost 1 year ago, Republicans in Congress made the biggest cut to Medicaid in history. These cuts are already wreaking havoc on our healthcare system and will decimate access to home and community-based services. A few weeks later, President Trump signed an executive order that ended support for Housing First policies and essentially criminalized homelessness. In essence, the Trump administration has created a roadmap for itself to institutionalize people who struggle to find housing, justify that institutionalization by throwing out Olmstead's integration mandate, and then leave people with no clear way to reintegrate into their homes and communities. It's hard to see how all of this will do anything but make matters worse. So that's why your work here is so important, and so thank you again for your advocacy and for everything you do, and I'm looking forward to the panel.
You're welcome.
All right, now I'll turn it over to Claire to moderate the panel.
Can you all hear me okay? Okay, great. Well, just briefly, as Jennifer said, my name is Claire Shannon. I am a Bazelon Fellow at the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law, and very excited to be talking with these folks today. So to start with introductions, at the very end to my far left is Rochelle Ellison. Rochelle is a speaker and advocate with the National Council for the Homeless. She's a woman with lived experience of being homeless, with co-occurring disorders for 17 years, and is now in long-term recovery. Rochelle is also a graduate of Housing First. She is a member of the Interagency Council on Homelessness. She works with the People for Fairness Coalition, the Rhonda Whitaker Streets to Life DC, and she is also a housing liaison for Serve Your City Ward 6 Mutual Aid, among other roles. Thank you. Okay. Rochelle stands in the gap for those unhoused with continuum of care needs. Beside her is Donald Whitehead. Donald is the executive director of the National Coalition for the Homeless and co-founder of Racial Equity Partners. He is a leading authority on homelessness, substance abuse, and racial equity with over 30 years of experience in personal recovery from homelessness and active addiction. Donald serves on the Homeless Veterans Advisory Committee for the Secretary of the Department of Veteran Affairs. Donald has testified before the 107th and 108th Congress, providing both oral and written testimony, and was instrumental in the creation and introduction of the Bringing America Home Act, a landmark piece of legislation addressing homelessness in the U.S. His work has earned him accolades such as the Distinguished Service Award from the Congressional Black Caucus and a Special Recognition Award from Congress in 2008. His career encompasses a wide range of roles in homeless services, from outreach to executive leadership. And then to my left is Marcella McGuire. Dr. McGuire is Director of Health Systems Integration for Corporation for Supportive Housing, or CSH. Her work nationally focuses on the intersection of the housing and healthcare sectors in financing, policy, and implementation of systems and programs. She is or has been engaged with multiple states, including California, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, New Jersey, and Washington State, around how to use Medicaid and health policy levers to address community needs and build opportunities for people with disabilities, particularly behavioral health disabilities. Prior to joining CSH, Marcella worked for 17 years for the City of Philadelphia, leading efforts to integrate behavioral health, managed care, and affordable and supportive housing systems. And then lastly, to my direct left is Corey Storch. Corey is the president and CEO of Bridgeway Behavioral Health Services. For 47 years, Corey has advocated for the recovery and community integration of people with mental health conditions, many of whom struggle with co-occurring addictions, chronic medical conditions, poverty, and homelessness. Under his leadership, Bridgeway grew from a small, primarily vocational service organization serving 200 people to a leading behavioral health care provider serving more than 8,000 people annually across northern New Jersey. Bridgeway provides integrated care and screening woven throughout evidence-based mental health service lines. They offer assertive community treatment, supported education and supported employment, homeless outreach and supportive housing, jail diversion, psychiatric screening and urgent mental health care, outpatient counseling, and substance use treatment services. Corey is a co-founder of the Supportive Housing Association of New Jersey and serves on various state stakeholder advisory groups. So that is our panel for today. And Corey, I think I'll begin with you. You have run Bridgeway Behavioral Health Services, as we said, which is a large mental health provider association in New Jersey, for nearly 4 decades and worked there almost 5. One of the key services you provide is supported housing. Can you describe what that looks like and why you use what is called a housing first approach?
Sure. So I do want to emphasize that Bridgeway, from its very beginning, really focused its mission on working with people who needed the help the most, people with very complex and co-occurring issues. And the Olmstead settlement actually had a lot to do with the growth of not only Bridgeway, but the whole mental health system. We saw a lot of people living in state psychiatric hospitals, getting no help at all, and in fact, sometimes getting traumatized. So we wanted to be part of that solution, and we looked around the state at what kind of help was needed. We knew that we needed government help, and at the time of, in the 1990s, early 1990s, our state was very dependent on a group home model. Group home model is very expensive, and I saw that that was not going to help enough people, and that a supportive housing approach, which was kind of a new service in New Jersey, but it wasn't government supported, that we had to do something. And supportive housing seemed like the best bet to serve much greater numbers, to serve them more flexibly, and I think the rest is history. So at this point in time, I think the Department of Human Services data on housing arrangements, I think there's 1,200 group homes, and there's 30,000 supportive housing units. So it's worked, and it's really saved the taxpayer a lot of money, and it's most of all, it's been very helpful for a very wide range of people. So I'm coming from the mental health side of it, but in New Jersey and I think elsewhere, it's really expanded to serve other special needs populations. So I'll talk a little bit more about what Housing First means to us, but I think that's going to be another question.
Thank you so much. And then, relatedly, Dr. McGuire, you have worked with people in service systems around the country to ensure that housing is available to enable people with disabilities to live in their homes and communities in accordance with the Olmstead decision. Can you talk a little bit about why housing is such an important part of disability service systems and what's needed for that housing to effectively serve people with disabilities?
Yeah, thank you so much, Claire, and thank you to Bazelon Center.
We need microphones to be.
Microphone. I'm sorry, is that now? Okay. Cool. No, thank you. Let's see, this was the thank yous. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Bazelon. I go back to, for those of us who had a Psychology 101 class in our lives, I go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you don't have food, clothing, and shelter, you're not thinking about anything else. You're thinking about trying to meet those very basic needs. Housing is the most basic need. I don't care who you are, what you do, where you live, you need a place to live. You need food and a roof. So that is the fundamental. 2, we have a terrible affordable housing crisis in our communities, a terrible affordable housing crisis across the nation. 4 out of 5 times that the housing world would like to say yes, you qualify, they don't have the resources to say yes. So far too often, it is people with disabilities who are the first people who can't navigate those systems, who need services. Our services systems also operate in what we call silos. I go here to get my housing assistance. I go there to get my mental health help, versus there for a substance use help, versus there for primary care. Navigating all of that, oh my gosh, it's really, really difficult. jump on a point that Corey made, supportive housing works. We've got the evidence, we've got the research, we've got programs like Corey's in New Jersey. Whatever state you're from, we can point you to programs that are working and are making a difference in the lives of people, in the lives of real people in your communities. Now I'm going to look at my notes and make sure there's points. Oh, thank you. Congress, I think, will be passing today the 21st Century Road to Housing. That's going to be really important. If you all worked on that today, thank you for that. But there's a lot more to be done. Silos. Oh, here it goes. When I was in Philadelphia with our behavioral health system, we had 200 housing choice vouchers a year managed by HUD that we were able to link with Medicaid mental health services, assertive community treatment, intensive case management, peer support, psych rehab. Those links were made at the system level. The onus on making those links didn't fall on the people on the street who needed help, didn't fall on the providers, because you've got to be visionary and, risk tolerant in order to braid those funding streams, because no one, to braid those funding streams. We see it in California with their CalAIM program. We see it in Arizona with Housing to Opportunities. North Carolina and Massachusetts now both have cost-saving data to show that Medicaid addressing housing needs, not actual housing, but housing services, makes a difference for people. So this collaboration, this systems alignment, and this working together across systems is really, really critical for people with disabilities, because people with disabilities shouldn't have to navigate these systems alone.
Thank you so much. And Rochelle, if I could go to you on the other end. You lived in Housing First Housing through Pathways to Housing DC. But before that, you had also been in and out of housing that used a different housing approach. Can you tell us a little bit about what your life was like in that earlier approach to housing, and then how it changed with the Housing First approach?
In the earlier life with the housing, there were stipulations. I had to address my mental health disorders, which I was not ready to deal with that trauma yet. I had to address my substance abuse disorders. I wasn't ready yet. So every time I got housing with conditions, I failed. I failed miserably because I wasn't ready. But I'm here to shatter the myth that Housing First doesn't work. Because February 9th of 2009, Pathways to Housing sent their outreach team for me and didn't take no for an answer. I got housed. I was with them for 16 years. Yes, the first 5 years, I didn't realize what I had. I got housed in 2009. But May the 6th of 2014, I realized the foundation under my feet, and I started working on me. I took that as an opportunity to get clean and sober. I took that as an opportunity to get mentally baseline. Mind you, I came to Pathways to Housing with 17 years of living on the streets of the nation's capital with co-occurring disorders. I was one of the worst of the worst. And through the opportunity to have the foundation under my feet and the services in the same place, the psychiatrist, the therapist, the medical doctor. I'm a woman with chronic health conditions that you just can't see, but they're definitely there. The mental health disorders are baseline, so you can't see them any longer because I work on me on a daily basis. So Housing First saved my life. It gave me the opportunity to make different decisions with the foundation and the wraparound services of an ACT team when I first came into the door, knowing that no matter what, they weren't going to take my keys, gave me the opportunity to say, maybe I can do this. They believed in me so much until I believed in myself. And by them believing in me, I sit here on my 58th birthday today. I'm so grateful to be here. I made it this far. With 12 years clean and sober, I can break my own anonymity anytime I choose to. And working on me on an everyday basis. And I graduated from Pathways to Housing DC 2 years ago. I was released by Department of Behavioral Health. I'm no longer a client of any agency in the DC area because they believed in me and loved me until I believed in me and loved myself. And now I do the same work, sitting on the Interagency Council on Homelessness, appointed to the advocate seat. I sit with all the decision makers as a lived experience expert and make decisions right along with them. I'm a speaker and advocate for the National Coalition for the Homeless. I work with Serve Your City doing outreach. I'm the lead of the Rhonda Whitaker Streets of Life DC Women's Initiative. Rhonda was an amazing advocate who fought for and had a voice for the people and stood in the gap as well. And we wanted to remember her and honor her as well. But housing first, I'm here to shatter the myths that it doesn't work, shatter the thoughts that it doesn't work, because I'm sitting on Capitol Hill in the Russell Building on a panel today, okay? Mentally baseline and free, absolutely free. And it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Rochelle, and happy birthday.
Thank you.
Just to briefly follow up and clarify one point. So with the earlier housing, when you say that there were conditions you weren't ready to meet, what would happen if you failed to meet those conditions?
Oh, I was put back on the street with no questions. I was told I had to leave. I had to pack my stuff and return to homelessness. Because I wasn't ready to address mental health or substance abuse issues at that point, people have to understand when we address our mental health issues and our trauma, and myself, early childhood trauma, into the homelessness trauma, into things that occur when you're in the street traumas, that's a lot of traumas to step into at one time. So, you know, I had to take bits and pieces, and I wasn't ready to do that with the conditional housing. So I was put right back into the homeless population with more trauma because I just got put back into the homeless population. But when I stepped into housing first, that's where I began to soar. And that's what gave me the opportunity to break generational curses and generational cycles of abuse and trauma that was there. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And then to shift a little bit to more of a national sort of viewpoint, Donald, you're the CEO for the National Coalition for the Homeless, and your advocacy centers around housing and homelessness policy. Can you discuss how recent federal policy shifts, some of which we've been discussing already, have impacted this area and what your view is on those shifts?
Sure, and you've heard one of the shifts that is a major shift away from the housing first model, and just a little bit on that, and then I'll talk more in depth about the other major shift. So housing first was created because before housing first, you had to earn your way into housing. And you were expected to address substance abuse and mental health issues prior to being placed into housing. And what resulted from that was the cream of the crop. So the people who were most likely to succeed were the only people getting housing. And so there was a shift in the homeless service delivery system to change to a program that gave you the opportunity to address those underlying needs, the mental health needs, the substance abuse needs, as you had a place to lay your head. It's really hard to provide substance abuse or mental health services when a person is laying outside on the ground or sleeping on a bench. So very simple idea to get those who were the most vulnerable into housing because they were using housing resources at a far greater level than those who had less behavioral health issues. Fast forward to 2024. In 2024, there was a shift in policy based on the Supreme Court decision. Some of you may be aware of the Grants Pass versus Johnson decision. And what happened in that decision is that the Supreme Court decided that it was not cruel or unusual to criminalize or involuntarily place institutionalized individuals that were homeless, even if there wasn't enough housing in their community. They said it was not a violation of the 8th Amendment. Following that, the next year, the president issued an executive order on crime and beauty is kind of how it was framed. And so he institutionalized the idea that people should be criminalized simply because they were homeless. And a lot of things happened after that. Prior to that, in the 3 decades prior to that, we did see criminalization in communities. So communities thought that the best way to resolve homelessness was to fine, jail, or imprison people who were homeless. So we saw that in about 168 communities in those first 3 decades after the McKinney-Vento Act was introduced in the late 80s. After that decision, we saw 360 communities institute criminalization practices. So we've seen an onslaught of these practices, and they negatively affect people experiencing homelessness in a number of ways. First of all, if you have a criminal record, it's a lot harder to access housing. It's a lot harder to access employment, and it shifted the narrative in the community that homelessness was an issue of behavioral health and criminalization and health and safety and criminalization versus the underlying causes, which are the lack of affordable housing and the lack of income. So poverty and housing are the primary drivers of homelessness. What this administration is actually doing is changing that narrative. It's a significant change. And now it's not just in HUD where you see the changes, it's the Department of Justice, it's HHS. There's this move towards penalizing people because of conditions that are outside of their control. It also makes people move to isolated environments. And what we found, we've been studying violence against people experiencing homelessness for the last 20 years. At one point, there were more acts of violence against people experiencing homelessness than all the other protected classes combined. Now that's changed recently. Unfortunately, we've had hate and violence happen to a lot of different groups of people, but at one point, the violence against people experiencing homelessness were at the top of the list. So the other things that happened, the dollars that are allocated for things like Housing First or transitional housing, whatever kind of housing that is available, are wasted because people being prepared for entrance into those programs are no longer able to do that because they're scattered. They go to places, they're hiding from law enforcement, and in effect also hiding from the outreach workers that would help them be able to manage their way into housing. The other things that happen, people lose valuables like medication, people lose valuables like identification. Everything that people have is in those intents in encampments. And when the bulldozers come in, sometimes people were killed. In Atlanta, someone was picked up in a bulldozer and put in a trash compactor, and they died. That has also happened here in the District of Columbia. So there are some really, really major consequences for this action. And the thing that everybody should remember about this is that it does not solve homelessness. Once you leave an involuntary institutionalized placement, once you leave jail, you're still homeless. So it's a expensive way not to solve homelessness. It does give the appearance that you've solved homelessness, so you don't see tents in D.C. right now because of the president's crackdown, but you absolutely see people experiencing homelessness in D.C. Mm-hmm. So it is a really unfortunate way of addressing homelessness. And let me just give you a couple of examples. I know I'm running out of time, where this has actually resulted in draconian practices that take us all the way back to Reconstruction. So in Tennessee, it's a felony with up to 6 years in jail if you're homeless on public property. In Kentucky, now they just repealed this, but this was in place for almost 2 years. There's a stand your ground law in Kentucky for people experiencing homelessness. So if you find somebody homeless on your property, you can use violence up to and including deadly violence to remove them. And just recently in the state of Louisiana, it's now a felony if you're found to be homeless, and you can not only be sentenced to jail for 2 to 5 years, you can also be given hard labor. So that takes us back to the period after Reconstruction. So these laws are getting more prominent, they're getting worse, and it does nothing. It does nothing. Please remember that. Criminalization does nothing to solve homelessness, so we need Congress. We need all of our members to speak out against these practices because they are actually causing a lot more harm than good. So I'm sorry.
No,
Went a little long on that. So.
Thank you, Donald. And to sort of continue speaking about that kind of shift in narrative against the housing first approach, Corey, I wanted to ask you, a lot of people seem to have misunderstood housing first to mean housing that has no accountability or does not engage anyone in services, but is just housing for free. Can you address whether those assumptions are correct?
Bridgeway has an assertive community treatment team. We also offer supportive housing and homeless outreach services. So there are roughly 1,100 people living in a supportive housing arrangement getting services from one of those programs. If we had made treatment a condition of getting housing and other services, the people who needed our help the most would be the most likely to just refuse everything. That's been our experience. It's also been our experience with, especially with assertive community treatment, because that's designed to help people who are the quote unquote, the most resistant to receiving services, or who simply just haven't benefited from the system because it wasn't designed for them. So with assertive community treatment, there's no conditions to get that help. And if a person, typically, if you offer them medication first, that probably is the most likely thing that they'll refuse off the bat. But if you simply provide continuous support, you find out what the person needs, whether it's housing or they're hungry, they want to get food. If your service team is responsive to that, you start to develop a relationship. Sometimes that happens quickly, sometimes it takes more time. With assertive community treatment, you get the time. You could knock on a person's door and they can say, F you, go away, and you come back again. I'll see you tomorrow. That approach, over the years, we've seen that approach work almost close to 100%. People who were totally refusing services, eventually, just through persistence and caring, coming around, developing a relationship with us, and then ultimately trusting us enough to accept treatment, whether that's medication, whether it's medication for a psychiatric condition or a substance use disorder. It works, but you have to spend the time. So to me, that's what makes these services accountable. And if you look at the Federal Register, there's language in there now that talks about what accountability means, and it sort of implies that housing first is not accountable. So here's the language: treatment, recovery, and self-sufficiency. That's what these services and what housing has to be accountable for. So I just want to address them. So I think I sort of addressed the treatment part of it, and I think I would simply say that if you insist that medical treatment or any kind of medication for a behavioral health condition is the first service offering, it won't work with a lot of people. But if you start with the concrete needs, back to the Maslow hierarchy, start with the concrete needs, you'll eventually get to a place where you can help the people you're serving get to whatever else they need, whether it's medication or maybe even like a higher level of residential treatment that like a group home. So you really have to develop the relationship. So the second part of what accountability is supposed to be is focus on recovery. So recovery means that you're looking at a person as a whole person. You're not just looking at their behavioral health condition or the fact that they're living in a living on the street. That you really address everything. And with Bridgeway's teams, and it's Bridgeway just kind of represents what's gone in New Jersey and around the country. We have these the PACT and supportive housing. These are multidisciplinary teams, so they really can address all kinds of needs. If somebody has a co-occurring substance use disorder, we have somebody on the team that can handle that, and that's part of a person's recovery. It's not just the mental health condition. If they are living in poverty and they just can't afford the rent or they can't afford food, then you help them with career services. I mean, this is a very important part of the whole recovery approach. But really what it comes down to is whatever that person defines as recovery for them, if you have a service team that can respond to that, that's what makes recovery happen. Last but not least, the Federal Register calls for self-sufficiency, and I think it's relevant. I mean, I think we could be upset with some of the language that we see in the Federal Register, but I don't disagree with any of those words. Self-sufficiency means that if a person is able to work, they can have the opportunity to work, and they will be encouraged and supported. And Bridgeway does provide these services. Again, these are services that are nationwide. Supported employment is an evidence-based practice that's offered across the country. We do it. It has a very good success rate with helping people get back to work. So to me, that's what Housing First is that if that's the first need for the person, then you address that first. And if you use that approach, you will develop the relationship that brings the rest of recovery into play.
Thank you. Rochelle, back to you. As someone who has actually lived in supported housing with Housing First principles, and then as we have discussed, housing that was not Housing First approach, what's your take on the argument? And you talked a little about this, but what would you say about the argument that Housing First is a failure?
Housing First is definitely not a failure. And I'm not the only one that's a success story of Housing First. I'm just the only one sitting here with a platform, because there are many of us that Housing First caused us to be success stories because we had the foundation of housing. We had CACs. We had mental health specialists. We had peer specialists. We had psychiatrists. We had our physical doctor, Unity. We had it all in one place at the organization that gave us sponsor-based vouchers or LRSP vouchers at that time. The difference between the Housing First approach and the approach that they want individuals to take care of their mental health or substance abuse disorder, the reason it doesn't work is if a person isn't ready, it's not going to work anyway. If a person is not ready to address these disorders or these issues, there's nothing that's going to keep them from addressing them with the Housing First approach, because they have the foundation. And if someone is not prepared to address the mental health or substance abuse disorders, they're not going to stay in housing, because change is scary. And I'm the first person to say I was very scared in the beginning of my journey. I was petrified because it's fear of the unknown. You don't know what's on the other side. All you know is trauma, staying in survival mode. All you know is how to just get by through day to day. You don't see a way out. You see doors closed. When you actually give yourself the opportunity with the Housing First model, so that's why the housing with conditions doesn't work. The Housing First model, however, gives you a different perspective to be able to see that I'm not going to lose my keys if I fail, so how about let's try it in a different way. So the stages of change started to come into the process for me. You know, the pre-contemplation, contemplation. I was preparing myself to do these changes, and then as preparation, action took over, and I started to see the difference, and I started to cross over. And it's a petrifying experience not to have an organization, Housing First model, standing beside you being your safety net until you don't need that safety net any longer. Today, I'm a productive member of society, but I could not have done that without the Housing First model. I'm absolutely not confused about that. Being a person who was given housing with conditions, I went back to the street every time because I just wasn't ready yet. And you definitely have to be ready to face a lot of trauma, fears, anxieties. It's a lot to overcome just to have a roof over your head. Some people, like myself, would rather be back in the street until I got approached with a Housing First model. And that's how I became the woman I am today, because I was able and given the opportunity and the resources to be able to work on me while knowing that I was not going to lose my keys to my apartment no matter what happened. So that gives people the opportunity to become successful, productive members of society. Thank you.
Thank you. And then, Donald, you spoke a little about this last time, but can you describe how you're seeing these sort of changed housing policies, including this rejection of housing first, impact people's lives?
Absolutely. So the most important part of those changes is that it's going to actually cause homelessness. So the estimates are between 95,000 to 177,000 people would become homeless simply because of the changes in how the COC funds are allocated. So right now, 90% of those funds go to permanent supportive housing renewals. The shift would be to about 60%, which would leave a lot of permanent supportive housing programs without resources to continue. The other policy that has a major effect is the loss of emergency housing vouchers. So that program was not renewed. It was a Biden-era, COVID-era program that provided emergency housing for people, and that would also be changed. That also did not get reallocated those funds. So those people, about 45,000, are potentially losing their housing as well. The other changes are in the not only in the Housing First program. What has been introduced is a treatment first model using transitional housing. Another one of those light bulb moments is that if you use transitional housing, you haven't solved homelessness. You get people, people are allowed to stay in that housing for 2 years. After 2 years, they need another housing resolution. They need permanent housing. So it doesn't make sense to shift from a model which had, in most cases, in most studies, an 80% plus success rate to a model that has a very different success rate. We also know that although the homeless population that you see on the street are people who sometimes have a higher level of substance abuse and mental health issues, that is not the case for the larger homeless population. The largest growing sector of the population is women and children or families. The largest population of people who are unsheltered are 55 and older. So we don't have a need for the entire population to have substance abuse or mental health issues. There's a lot of people that are there because of things like domestic violence and just the lack of affordable housing. We have a 7 million gap in the number of units available opposed to the number of units that need it. There's nowhere in this country that you can work a minimum wage job and be able to afford a 2-bedroom housing unit, nowhere in the entire country. So we have an issue of housing affordability. It's not an issue of behavioral health. We have pathologized the issue of homelessness, and we have to get back to changing that narrative. I operated permanent supportive housing in Florida. We housed the 300 hardest to serve. Some of those people had been on the streets for 20 plus years, and we were able to get them into permanent supportive housing, and none of those people lost their housing after the 2-year limit. This is coupled with the changes in subsidized housing. So we have to talk about the mixed immigration rules. We have to talk about term limits. All of those things will have a detrimental impact on the number of people experiencing homelessness in this country. The HUD rules are now calling for bonuses for communities that criminalize. Again, that is not a resolution for homelessness, but this administration is actually providing bonuses and actually going after communities that don't criminalize. And we know that we do need more mental health services, more behavioral health overall services. We do need more opportunities for people to get substance abuse treatment. However, if you don't have the treatment, institutionalizing people does not work. So we're hundreds of thousands of beds short on what we need. We know when people go to jail, that they don't get mental health treatment. We know that people who go to jail because of criminalization practices, 80% of those people are in jail because of quality of life issues. We took a look through a survey at all 360 cities that had shifted to criminalization. What we found is that it did not reduce homelessness, it actually increased homelessness. And that is backed up by a study by the University of Central Florida. So we're moving full sail ahead into policies that actually exacerbate homelessness. Certainly there's absolutely a need to push back. We also have changes in the YHDP program. That's the program for youth that has been very effective because of the involvement of youth. The other thing I will say is that there's also a pushback on the involvement of people with lived experience, which we think is critical. The people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And it's not that they're special people. I think Rachel is a special person, but it's not that they're special people. It's not that they know the answers, but what they know is what they've been able to survive that wasn't a good policy. And so that is why we always need people with lived experience in the forefront of these issues, and that's another shift. And I could go on and on because there's many, many shifts. There's a fair housing, the real devolution of fair housing in this country, the move away from the equity work that we were doing, and there's many, many more, and I know that we have other panelists to speak, but what is being done at HUD is actually illegal. So Congress has the power of the purse, and we've already had 2 cases. Our partners, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and the National Law Center have brought suit. And it was found, the 2025 changes were found to be illegal, and there's just a new suit that will hopefully result in the same outcome, that there'll be a pushback on the illegal changes at HUD. But meanwhile, a lot of confusion in the community, a lot of late resources available to people. Some community-based organizations can still pay the rent, but a lot don't have the resources, and we're already starting to see people fall victim to that. So these changes are devastating. They are changes that are entered into despite the research that says differently. And so we really need your support in pushing back on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. And so having just heard about, the potential loss of supported housing that's desperately needed, that already exists, and then, knowing that, it could be expanded further and others could benefit from it. Dr. McGuire, can you tell us a little bit about what happens to disability service systems when there's not enough supportive housing to meet the needs of people with disabilities?
Sure. Nothing good. Never sure whether I'm getting this right or not. Nothing good. Nothing good from a cost-effective perspective. Nothing good from a recovery perspective. I want to lift up a couple of things folks said. One, that piece about trauma that Rochelle raised. I've been in this work for 40 years. I've talked to hundreds, maybe thousands of people. Trauma before they become homeless. Homelessness is inherently trauma. That is just an absolute theme you hear across the board there. So how really, really important addressing that is, meeting people where they are, not demanding certain things at certain times. So I think that's really critical. And the services are critical. Treatment, I'm a psychologist. I love treatment. Treatment is wonderful. But treatment, to Donald's point, lasts only so long. Involuntary hospitalizations, they're usually measured in hours. Maybe in some places days, but mostly hours. Detox, 3 days tops. Residential treatment, residential substance abuse treatment, 90 days some places is a really good long length of stay in residential substance abuse treatment. Even recovery housing, 1 year, 2 years, there's a cliff. And what happens is people return to homelessness. They've done everything they were supposed to do. They do treatment. But as long as housing is completely unaffordable, particularly for people in minimum wage roles, particularly for people on disability incomes, they're going back into the homelessness system because there's no other place for them to do. They've done everything we've asked them to do from a treatment perspective, and now we're traumatizing them again by sending them back into homelessness. So opportunities where people can have affordable and supportive housing is what we recommend works.
Thank you. And to pick up a little on the sort of cost effectiveness of supported housing, Corey, about 15 years ago, New Jersey entered a settlement agreement that resulted in developing a lot more supported housing and enabling many people to leave state hospitals. Can you talk about the impact that expanding supported housing had in the state?
I think I mentioned before, like how many beds of supportive housing exist, that none of them existed before the 1990s. So, I mean, it's been a huge impact, and I think I said 30,000. It doesn't even, and it doesn't meet the need. I think there's a study that I recommend. It was put out by Corporation for Supportive Housing and the National Coalition, also, I think, put it out together, that estimated unmet need. And it's significant. I think,
1.1 million
thank you. Yeah, I didn't know that. So,
nationwide, not just in New Jersey.
and this is if we're going to get serious about these unmet needs, it has to be cost effective because the taxpayer has to cover the costs, and to some extent. So just here's some numbers. I know you numbers people are out there. The cost of serving somebody in supportive housing is half the cost of serving them in a shelter or serving them in a group home. It's a quarter of the cost of having them live in prison. So that's why this is such an important solution. It's not just great for the person, it's great for the system. It's great for the taxpayer. Here's some other numbers for you. Roughly speaking, supportive housing, depending on the person's, what their presenting issues are, is going to cost $15,000 to $35,000, $40,000 in services. And then if there's a rent, if you want to add the rent into that, that's what makes it about half the cost of a group home. The group home cost in New Jersey, $2,025 for A+ group home, that's the highest level of support, is $99,000 a year. One step down from that, a group home, $82,000 a year. It's very expensive. I mean, for some people it's needed, but most people don't need it. And the fact is, with a supportive housing approach, it is flexible. So if the person starts out in their own apartment and they have very, very complex and serious challenges, you can design the service. Like at Bridgeway, we have service teams. They could visit the person every day of the week. We've had situations where somebody coming out of a hospital was really struggling, and we saw them twice a day for the first 3 weeks. But over time, what we see is people stabilize. If you provide the right services, the right amount, in the right place, right time, people will need less and less services. So this is a service that actually gets less expensive over time compared to a group home.
Thank you. All right. So I think we're going to wrap up and sort of get a final word from our other panelists. So I'll ask both Donald and Dr. McGuire to answer this question. And perhaps, Donald, you can go first. Can each of you talk about what Congress could do to make sure that housing policy supports community living for people with disabilities?
Sure. I think the first thing I've already said is that Congress has the power of the purse, and Congress needs to make sure that this administration and any other administration holds to that promise that they can't make changes without Congress giving permission to make those changes. The other thing is a lot more complicated and probably a lot more ambitious, but it's the only way we ever get to the point where we solve homelessness. We have enough resources for people with disabilities and behavioral health issues. We need more money. And I know when people hear that money is the answer, they kind of shy away from that. But we've seen when we injected resources into this issue, we saw dramatic changes. You didn't see people on the streets of America during COVID. And that's because we had protection for evictions. We had immediate entrance into permanent supportive housing. We had more money for outreach. The issue is for 40 years, the National Coalition actually drafted the McKinney-Vento Act. That was back in 1987. That is still the primary source of funding for homeless programs in America. So we have never had the luxury of having the resources to the level of need for homelessness. So we need resources to solve two things. We need to close the front door. My colleague used to say this all the time. I borrowed it from her. We need to make sure people aren't entering the homeless system, and we need to make sure once they enter, because we do a great job. Once they get in the system, we do a really good job of navigating them through the system, but the problem is we don't have the resources once they leave. So we need an influx of affordable housing, and we need resources to the level of need. So those are the two things. Congress does need to speak out about these criminalization practices. I know there's a homeless caucus in the House. I know there are people in the Senate that are really concerned, but we need you to speak out when we're entering into practices that mirror the failure of Reconstruction. We need people to speak out when people are being criminalized simply because they're homeless without a choice or they have behavioral health issues. That is not something that can go without any opposition in our Congress. So we need Congress to understand that the narrative that is being promoted is a false narrative. People are homeless because they can't afford housing. People are homeless because they don't have jobs that pay livable wages. People are homeless because they have domestic violence and health issues. It's not a health and safety issue. It's not a criminalization issue. It's people who can't afford to be able to live even at the best job that they can possibly get. So we need more resources. We need resources to address the structural needs: more health care, more housing, and more income.
All right.
Thank you. And then Dr. McGuire, if you could talk.
All right, try as well. Follow the evidence, see what works. Shout out to, if you're interested in the housing and homelessness world, shout out to Greg Coburn's book, Homelessness is a Housing Issue. It really talks about, it's not like there's more mentally ill people in Los Angeles than there is in Chicago. It's that housing's more expensive. And so you see that, it becomes people with disabilities overwhelmingly impacted, but you see that homelessness is a housing issue. So follow the evidence. Look at models that work. It was exciting to hear Corey talk about assertive community treatment and all of the different resources they have, but far too often, A, the services are underfunded, B, the services in supportive housing and in other places in our communities, they're underfunded. They are, when they are primarily Medicaid funded, they are primarily voluntary, so someone has to be ready to go in, make an appointment, have their insurance coverage on, and say, hi, I'll do what you want. We heard from Michelle how hard that is to do, if not impossible, when you're on the streets. And I hear that in communities across the country. So fund the services, engage the services. We're very, very concerned. HR 1 takes $1 trillion out of Medicaid. It's, you know, there's a focus right now on home and community-based services around fraud, waste, and abuse. Fraud is bad, waste is bad, but a lot of what is happening here is the services that people need in order to stay in the communities. I also haven't heard, and I want to make sure folks walk away with aging, not just disabilities, but also aging. It's one of the largest and fastest growing numbers of people who are experiencing homelessness. And I will also say that if you've experienced homelessness, disabilities, the aging challenges happen sooner. It's a hard life being homeless.
Yes, it is.
And you start things that I may not experience because I've never been homeless from a health perspective until 70s or 80s. People with long histories on the street are experiencing 40s and 50s and younger. So that's another critical issue that we're going to have to bring together, come together to address as a country. And then finally, I will just say the cross-sector work, bringing together the housing and the services facilitate access to those services, to the whole model of supportive housing, affordable housing, and services in our communities every day.
Thank you. All right, and Rochelle, we'd like to give you the last word. How would you describe the impact of a housing-first approach to housing, and what are your final thoughts on how to make sure we keep doing what works?
I think everybody in this room already knows how I feel about housing first. It absolutely works, and I think that we need to get before the people and before Congress to make the decisions, have a person of a success story from every single state. I'd be honored to represent Washington, D.C., and have us stand before Congress, because what can they say if you have 51 people standing there telling you that this does work and we couldn't have made it without it? And I think seeing the impact with presentations of us before and after, seeing what we've been through, the domestic violence and what we've been able to overcome, the trauma, the substance abuse, the mental illness, getting baseline because of Housing First, I think that the impact that all of that makes needs to be shown to them firsthand by the people who have experienced it, lived through it, and are still living through it, and are productive members of society today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, I would like to extend a thank you to all of our panelists for their excellent contributions and discussion today.
Thank you.
And now we do have time for questions. We're going to open it up for a Q&A, if anyone has any. Sure, and there are microphones in the aisles if you're more comfortable using that, or you can project if you feel that's better.
I'll take your call.
And one of the biggest issues, I think, with homelessness in the state of Florida is hidden homelessness. So couch surfing, people stay with family and whatnot. So I wonder, are there any initiatives in Housing First that are addressing hidden homeless populations?
Go ahead. No.
So I think there is a real effort to use outreach to get to people who are in that situation. Unfortunately, we also have sort of dueling definitions. So for the Department of Education, that person would be considered homeless. However, for the Department of HUD, they're not. And so one of the things we're working on is, and there has been some movement on that, if you are declared homeless under another federal definition, there are people that can get services. So that is the big issue. So one of the best ways to address that is to increase outreach services. And so I know that that is something that has been done a lot lately. And that's why we're so concerned about the changes in subsidized housing, especially around mixed immigration status. So we are working on that issue, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
I'll add that there are service models that exist to address like homelessness prevention and eviction avoidance. In New Jersey, these programs are funded. The real question is, how sustainable is the funding? I don't have the answer to that. And these are mostly state funded. Like a lot of states, New Jersey is budget challenged. So we need a lot of advocacy to support what it really works.
And I'd like to answer that through the People for Fairness Coalition. I'm contracted with the Community Partnership. So I'm in the street, standing and making sure people don't slip through the cracks. Even people that are couch surfing, because you know the PIT count, the PIC count doesn't count them because they're hidden. So we're making sure that those individuals do not slip through the cracks, and we're searching them out through their outreach team, and then sitting them down and doing the VI SPDATs and onboarding them to the homeless management information system, and then sitting at the coordinated assessment housing placement, the CAP table, to get them on a by name list, to get them matched. And we're walking them through the entire process to their keys when they do have keys, or in this case right now, the non-congregate shelter and transitional housing.
And I would also add, there is another great book. We talked about one really good book title. There's a book called There's No Place for Us. And it actually really focuses on that population in Atlanta. So there are some resources that are in that book, and it's by Greg Stevenson. It really looks at a lot of those individuals are also staying in like the weekly motels. So it really does look at the resources available. A couple of programs, the Rapid Rehousing Program is a program that is utilized for that population. And there's also the 211 system in a lot of communities that offer diversion and offer state resources for that population as well.
Yeah. States are trying to build something called closed-loop referral systems. It's trying to get all of that information together. Where is the housing? Who do I call for outreach? Every time I go to a new city, I've got to like, what's the outreach number? And so trying to bring that all together, and there are really exciting opportunities there. But I always like to say, they will tell you where the inn is. They will not tell you what to do when there's no room at the inn. Right. So they are not the solution, but they can be helpful.
Hi, I'm Cameron. I'm with the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. I just wanted to see what you all thought / could predict about the HUD NPRM that takes away the protections for gender and sexual orientation for HUD shelters, other housing options. I was wondering what impact you thought that would have on the homeless community and, multi-marginalized people who are disabled and trans or queer, and how that could impact the work that we are doing.
The equal access rule. There is a comment, there's a few days left in the comment period for that. We know that it'll have a detrimental impact. It would basically, in some cases, make people from the LGBTQIA population unable to access shelter. Now, where that is a huge issue is with unaccompanied youth and youth in general. A lot of young people become homeless because they express their situation to their parents, and then they're kicked out of their house. The majority of those youth are also youth of color, so a tremendous impact on those populations. We have been discussing resources to address it through the Human Rights Campaign. But it certainly is a huge issue, and it certainly, this is, when I said that there were like 100 different things that are happening within this administration. There's both the actual policy, but there's the executive orders also. That's another place where they are encouraging communities to not provide access for people that are in the LGBTQIA community. So that's another barrier, another way to keep people out of housing. So we have made joint comments through the National Coalition of Housing Justice, and we're also encouraging our members to make comments because they have to address those comments. They don't always address them effectively, but they have to. So I'd encourage everybody in here to make sure you get your comments in before the comment period is over. But it certainly will have a negative impact.
Yeah, I was just seeing if I missed anything in my comment draft, so.
Well, thank you so much for doing that.
My concern, and I've been thought about the DOJ statement that came out last week,
Absolutely. One of the issues, and related to permanent supportive housing, is that a lot of the services in those houses, in that housing, excuse me, comes from Medicare. We really were doing a lot of work around making sure that homeless service providers were using Medicaid dollars to provide services, because one of the most important elements, and one that is a false narrative about the effectiveness of permanent supportive housing, is that it's housing only. It's not. It's housing plus services. It's people get those services in a housing unit versus outside. And Medicaid was being used across this country very effectively to provide those services. Now, with the cutbacks in Medicaid, we'll see a dramatic cutback in some of those services, which really makes it hard to be able to provide the services adequately, because you have to, I believe, in my opinion, stick to the fidelity of the permanent supportive housing model. You can't do service light. You can't do no service. You have to do both in order to make sure people are addressing the trauma and being able to overcome some of those barriers that have caused them to be homeless in the first place. So that is another place where we're going to see more people become homeless. Because if you can't get those services, sometimes people can't succeed in permanent supportive housing.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. We have, right now, 31 states are approved to cover housing-related services, not the housing, but the services that help people get housing and maintain housing. We're starting to see some of that walk back. Democratic and Republican administrations have been clear this is a home and community-based service. So you see all of the challenges and the way that community really has to come together and advocate around that. Let me just also highlight that when states have to cut back in money, they do it in a couple of critical ways. They pay providers less. Never a good idea, right, Corey? They cut back on who's eligible for services, so they have to serve few people. They add administrative burdens. You used to have one appointment to get your Medicaid. Now you have to have 3, et cetera. So more people lose coverage, and then the state saves money that way. They cut back on services, they cut back on people, they make it administratively complex, and they pay providers less. I'm sorry, there are 4 ways that states do this. All of this impacts people's ability with disabilities to stay in their housing, be successful in their housing, be part of their communities.
And I just want to release Donald because he has a plane to catch at BWI. And I meant to. I also happen to be.
Thank you, guys.
And Rochelle as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
All right. We still have time for another question or two for our other panelists. Yes, right there.
Yes, my name's Heather from Collaborative Support Programs of New Jersey. As we've heard all your comments, and we see the many states moving to extend the commitment times, we see a decrease in discharges from our institutions to supported housing. We see people saying that, or here, Housing First doesn't work, due to a lot of the comments, Marcella, you had just made on some of those burdens that impact to the providers. How do we combat those as advocates, especially to the treatment teams, that people need to be community ready when you can't get community ready in these institutions?
How do you advocate, basically? How do we advocate better? So speaking as a provider, we're probably not high on the list of the people who are going to be heard most seriously, but the people who are receiving the services, the consumers, and the families, they're the ones who have the biggest impact on advocacy. There's no doubt. Like in the mental health world, NAMI is the gold standard, and legislators want to and have to listen to the family members. So we have to make a bigger effort to work as provider. I'm speaking as a provider, to work with those kinds of advocates so that we could also be effective and they make them more effective.
I'd say I'd add a couple of things to that. Definitely what Corey said. One, we're always trying to build bigger coalitions and build bigger tents. So there used to be, so there's a broad disability advocacy world, and then there's, I'm concerned about mental health, I'm concerned about IDD, you're concerned about, people with physical disabilities. The more they come together, the more they collaborate and work together in order to raise that message that adequate services, no matter what your disability, are part of a life in the community. That comes together. The more you have a broad coalition, that's not just providers and 1,000 more Corys and 1,000 more Rochelles, but bringing them all together and organizing them and in a consistent message there. I will also say, the second thing I will say is the research work. The research to say whether it's, this is the efficacy of the model, this is the services that are needed, when things don't go well, this is because services are underfunded or whatever is that, bringing that all together and making that materials and information all more easily accessible. CSH has a new product, collaboration we're doing with other entities called the National Center for Housing and Health. I'd love to talk to anybody about that because we're trying to bring together all of those different initiatives across disability, cross-country, bringing that message together on how housing and health need to work together.
I think that the new kids on the block for advocacy, from my perspective, are the autism advocates. And they're relatively new compared to the other special needs groups, but they seem to be getting a lot of traction. And I think, to Marcella's point, like the other advocacy groups, like where I'm coming from, like we need to connect with the autism people and everybody else because they are getting more and more traction, and they should. And I think if we could work with them, we would have more clout with legislators.
Any other questions?
Oh, can I ask one more thing also? Just occurred to me. Another thing, part of Cooperation for Supportive Housing, one of the things we're doing is we're assisting providers across the country to do what's called Supportive Housing Week. We're doing it in August. My colleague Katie Kitchen will give me the dates if I can't remember it. What week? Supportive Housing Week, the third week of August. Your members are back in the districts, et cetera. We're trying to engage folks like Corey and, as I said, providers across the country to be able to engage with their members, engage with staff like you, and show what they do every day. Talk to people who live in their housing, like Rochelle. Talk to and hear your stories there, and show how important that is, and support that effort. It's more than a full-time job, sir, to run an agency like yours. Trying to build that political muscle and collaboration, I think, is something we're trying to support as well.
Makes sense.
Thank you. Any final questions from the group? Oh, yes. Right there.
Hi, my name is Molly from the APIH, and I had just a question regarding Medicaid implementation, especially with HR1. I'm curious how are advocates kind of supporting the in-house community through on work requirements that they might not qualify for, and are there any innovative approaches that certain states are using in terms of their 115 waivers in terms of re-entry determination or services and programs, or even opioid settlement funds in terms of using that for supportive housing in some form? Is there room for innovation, and kind of what are the biggest challenges that we're seeing on the ground?
So I heard part of that question, but I heard the words work requirements, right? So I think this is an important topic. Part of the concern, I think, coming from the current administration, and maybe this is part of the accountability issue, is you have a lot of people, special needs folks, living in supportive housing that are unemployed. If you look at the data, it's concerning. And so I think the question is, if you could get like a supplemental security income, and you could get like a housing voucher, and maybe you don't have to work, even though you're capable of working. Are there people out there like that? And there are. So I think we need to figure out how to do better with that, and we have to offer more and better career solutions. One of the challenges is that career services is generally not considered a medical service, so Medicaid doesn't pay for it. I guess there's been some discussion that I think there may be some pieces of it that Medicaid might cover, but essentially it's a tremendously underfunded service that is needed, and probably looking into the immediate future, it's probably going to be needed more and more because of the work requirements. So this is something that has to be part of our advocacy platform. We have to help more people in supportive housing bring in more income so they could pay more rent, so that whatever is available to support people, there's more of that to support more people, because more people are contributing from working.
Oh, there's so many good pieces to your question. I heard something about opioid settlement funds. CSH has a new paper on where states are using opioid settlement funds. Happy to share that with you. Also, work requirements. I'm very excited to say CSH and the Bazelon Center, smiling at Claire because she helped me, and Jennifer Mathis, because we all wrote this together, have a new toolkit out in the last week in regard to these are all the questions advocates in states need to answer. Very specific questions in order for people to be able to keep their Medicaid on and their support workers in an HR1 environment. So a national toolkit can't get that detailed. We're working in California with a group called the Stay Covered California Coalition. Shout out to Homebase and support from the California Healthcare Foundation to answer all of those questions for California. We're likely to do some work on this in New York. But there are very state-specific resources and materials that folks are going to need to help people keep their coverage on. And then let me beg anybody who works in the healthcare space to make sure that you don't just keep talking to the usual suspects in the healthcare world, but you talk to the affordable housing field, you talk to the homelessness field. These are all places who work with people who are going to need to do things in order to keep their Medicaid coverage on, and please help us build out the detailed trainings and supports that direct service workers need in each of your states. The new toolkit gives all the questions that you need, I like to say, but the answers are going to differ state to state.
All right, we have time for one more, if anyone has. Is there? No? Okay. All right, great. Well, I would like to thank our panelists once again for their contributions. And I will hand it over to my colleague, Anne Raish, for closing remarks.
Hi, everyone. My name's Anne Raish, and I'm a senior staff attorney at the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law. I'm going to close us out, but I first want to thank our wonderful speakers, Marcella, Corey, Donald, and Rochelle, for being with us today and sharing your experiences. Conversations like these that are based on actual data and lived experience are now more important than ever. We are experiencing unprecedented attacks on long-established disability rights protections. As Jennifer mentioned, just last week, this Department of Justice took the position in a memo that our disability rights statutes in Olmstead do not protect the right to live in the community. The memo had particular animus towards people with mental health disabilities and those who are homeless, and it reflects a gross distortion of the law and the facts. Olmstead is a solution to homelessness, not the cause of it. The expansion of community-based services and housing programs that followed Olmstead has enabled hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities to live in their own homes as part of their communities, supported by the services that they need. Cutting Medicaid and restricting access to vital housing programs, as this administration has done, is what causes instability in health and housing. They are pulling the rug out from under people who rely on these services, and they are now attempting to remove their legal protections. When President Bush signed the ADA into law almost 36 years ago today, he observed that the law would ensure that people with disabilities are given the basic guarantees for which they have worked so long and so hard: independence, freedom of choice, control of their lives, the opportunity to blend fully and equally into the rich mosaic of the American mainstream. These principles are enshrined in the ADA and in Olmstead and cannot be taken away by fiat. So on this anniversary of Olmstead, let's continue to focus on the actual law and the truth, and remain steadfast in our efforts to protect the rights of people with disabilities. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Yeah. You can catch it. Make sure you get connected to